Thanks again for joining us. I'm Lauren Maloney. With us this Sunday is Dan French, the new Education Secretary for the state of Vermont. Sir, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
1 month in.
That's right.
A lot going on, right?
Yes.
It's busy, because certainly your culminated with the beginning of school as well.
Yes, very exciting. A lot going on.
I did want to ask you, just so we can get this out of the way, about the situation at Burlington High School regarding the Director of Guidance, Mario Macias, suspended, and then last Friday we learned he was put on administrative leave. As far as the students who were the first ones to report about his situations from the BHS Register, should those students have been told to take that article down?
Yeah, well, I'm reluctant to comment on the specific situations, but I think it's, we have a new law in the state, fairly new, and, it's precisely to address these kinds of issues, to really create a pretty high standard for administration to limit free press on the part of students. So interested to see how that rolls out, but my judgment is that the students were really, trying to do the right thing, and I hope the administration can deal with that proactively from an educational standpoint with the students at some point.
Looking back on it, do you think administrators maybe need to be advised, counseled more when it comes to this new law for student journalists?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think, I used to be a principal, and I know we make judgment calls all the time on these things, but every decision we make in a school is ultimately an educational decision for students, and the students learn so much from this specific situation. So I think it is, I'm sure a lot of administrators around the state are watching this incident to see what they can learn from it, and I think, yeah, certainly there'll be a lot of conversation and probably some training about how to address these kinds of things and where the thresholds are, where it's appropriate to limit student speech or not. The new law sets a pretty high standard.
Okay. But that wasn't in the plans before this incident at BHS, as far as learning more about it?
Yeah, you mean from a statewide plan to do more training on that? I'm not really sure. I know, when I was teaching at St. Michael's College, I used to teach a law class, and we talked quite a bit about this initiative when it came out. I'm not sure what's in place for training statewide for folks, but I think just following the dialogue inside the legislature when the law was created, and it's part of a national movement to really create a higher standard when administration can proactively seek to limit student free speech. So I think that whole dialogue is a good one, and I think in this situation, like I said, I'm not quite sure around the specifics about it, but I think we're all going to learn a lot from it.
Okay. One parent, by the way, at the school board meeting last Thursday said she's had it when it comes to some of the administration at BHS. She said, quote, "I'm mad. I love this city. I was proud to send my kids to these schools. But for the first time in my life this week, I said to somebody, honestly, I wouldn't send your kid to BHS." Yeah. How does that make you feel?
That's hard. I mean, I've been in, spent a lot of my life at school board meetings, and I think it's an appropriate venue for those kinds of comments to come forward, and I hope I hope the parent feels some satisfaction in having the opportunity to present that in an open forum, and I hope the school board and the administration take those kinds of comments to heart.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the other bigger issues going on. Education spending. We just have a few months when it comes to the legislature kicking off. How will you work with them to talk about such a big issue to Vermont and elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it is a huge issue, and it overshadows so much of what else we want to do as a state. And I think, the governor has set some very ambitious and I think appropriate goals in terms of making the state more affordable and growing the economy. And all those issues come back to really education and education funding, because we spent so much of our tax dollars on it. So it's going to be a complicated process, I'm sure. We're coming out of the end of Act 46, which, certainly as one of its goals was to address costs, and we have a number of other policy initiatives that were recently passed by the legislature. We have a revision to special ed funding, for instance, that'll take several years to implement, and we have a task force on reducing the number of employees in school districts. So we have a number of different initiatives coming together. I'm not quite sure how they're all going to play out and what that time frame is going to be, but I know there's a lot of energy around this issue, and it will be one we're going to be prepared to help legislators deliberate on.
We're on the back end of Act 46, correct? Is there a few more lingering schools that need to make decisions?
I wouldn't quite call it the back end, but you're right. It's sort of one end of the process is coming to a conclusion, and now we're in the part of the process which is essentially forcing districts to merge. And the State Board of Education has within its authority to do that, and the State Board, actually tomorrow is our last, it would be Wednesday, we're having our last meeting in Chester where the State Board's going to be taking testimony from folks in the region, and then the State Board's going to move into sort of a deliberative mode where they're going to consider all this information and then seek to make a political resolution to it, meaning in publicizing the statewide plan for governance. I sit on the State Board of Education as a non-voting member. It'll be interesting to see what the board does with all the testimony they've heard from this small group of districts left over that haven't been able to find a path forward, and to what extent they've been provided adequate flexibility or not is the open question I think that the State Board's going to wrestle with in the coming months.
Also enrollment, something the governor has mentioned. As far as where we are right now, I mean, we just started the 2018-2019 school year.
Right.
How is it looking, and what can we do to ensure that enrollment is still there for our public schools?
Yeah, it's the broader pattern of enrollment is pretty significant decline. You know, we've lost about 30% of our students in the last 10 years or so. I'm not sure where we are right now this school year. We conduct what's called a census period, basically in the first 40 days of school. So we'll be getting those preliminary numbers in October, so we'll know where we're at. But I think the broader pattern is one, come back to the conversation on economic development. You know, we've got to figure out a solution to those things in order to address the population issues, which the other dynamic, not only are we down, there's just fewer students, but they're also, our population is aging. So I think, that's why education keeps popping up in conversations on economic development and workforce development. Because it plays a huge role in that, and we've got to think, I think, a little more strategically about how education can factor into the overall economic and social development of the state.
That said, the agency recently announced it would endorse the National Center for Construction Education and Research curriculum, making sure students who are in some of these trade and tech schools basically have the skills they need, correct?
Yes.
To get back into the workforce.
Right.
So how can we ensure that those students are ready and able to stay in Vermont and benefit the state?
Yeah, and I think the career technical education programs are huge, and a huge resource that we have to figure out how to leverage. And this is an example of the constant sort of revisiting and alignment to industry standards that goes on inside these programs, what's called credentialing. So each of these programs is aligned to industry credentials, and that process is constantly being reviewed. We have partnerships with area businesses around each of those centers. Where my interest in those programs, which I think are just really wonderful resources for our state, is to understand what we can do to eliminate some of the barriers for students to attend or access those programs. My impression right now, it's for students, unfortunately, it's more or less they have to make a choice, yes or no, whether to participate in these programs, as opposed to perhaps looking at a more flexible or ad hoc way for them to take in and out, take some of the programs or do some of it online or what have you. But I think a lot of our students would benefit from having greater access to these programs. And certainly from an economic development strategy, we need to have more students moving through those programs targeted at specific places in our economy where they can find employment.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I appreciate you being here, sir. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
And we'll be right back.